welcome back to my channel once more. In this video, I'm going to give you an update on the Russian death toll in their invasion of Ukraine, because a story came out on iStories on the 11th of August this year, proving that 5,107 Russian soldiers have been killed in Ukraine. So iStories is a Russian website. Surprised it hasn't been blocked. It might be operating from outside Russia, because some of these Russian language media outlets are often run from Lithuania, places like that, where the Russian government doesn't manage to censor them. And the Russians have blocked a lot of websites. But so far as I know, this one's still available in the Russian Federation. So iStories use open sources to arrive at this data. And they've got the names of the dead in every case, and in some cases, their home addresses. It was using social media posts announcing the death of a friend or relative killed on the so-called special military operation in Ukraine, or indeed local newspaper reports on funerals, things of that nature. And so this is fascinating. Now, in mid-March 2022, the Russian Ministry of Defense released a death toll of 1,151 without giving the names or addresses of the deceased. Now, tellingly, in the subsequent 5 months, the Kremlin has not dared release another update on that, I suppose because the news is just so dispiriting from their point of view. Now, that death toll in mid-March was after under a month of war. Remember, the invasion commenced on the 24th of February this year. The full-scale invasion, of course, the more limited invasion of Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk goes back to 2014. So, okay, so we'll say that under a month, the death toll was 1,351. We're almost 6 months in. Well, let's take that previous figure and multiply it by 6, assuming that Russian soldiers have been killed at about the same rate. Now, that would give us a statistic of 8,106. But the official death toll is almost certainly a major underreporting. The Russian government lies about everything. And their statistics are always too rosy, whereas it comes to inflation, to unemployment, to how many people are living below the official poverty line, to how much equipment they have, things like that. They lie about the most blatant things, about the attempted murder of Sergei Skripal in Salisbury, about the massacre of 20,000 Polish prisoners of war in Smolensk and Katyn in 1940, about the fact that they will claim that this war is not a war. Their foreign minister said that they've not even invaded Ukraine. They claim that this democratic government of Ukraine run by a Jewish president is Nazi, and on and on and on, saying that Ukraine has chemical weapons, biological weapons. No matter how blatant, they will tell that lie, that they didn't shoot down that Malaysia Airlines plane, and so on. So NATO estimates Russia has suffered around 15,000 deaths. Now, Ukraine has also suffered at least several thousand combat deaths, because certainly at the beginning they had about as many troops in the fight as Russia did. If anything, Ukraine probably has a slight numerical advantage at the moment. But the Russians were just so inept, made themselves sitting ducks. The Ukrainians in some ways have got superior weapons. They don't have so many planes and so much artillery. So the Ukrainians, they have released death toll figures, and I've no doubt they're lying too, maybe not quite so much as the Russians. They don't want to induce despondency into their people. Now, with a population of 140 million, Russia is not about to run out of soldiers. Now, there was another very revealing statistic when they analysed this, iStories. So they looked at the home regions of the Russian soldiers who had been killed in Ukraine. Now, Russia's got 84 federal subjects, as in some are whatever federal cities, Moscow being an example. They've got autonomous republics, which is the homeland of an indigenous ethnic minority like Buryatia, the Republic of Chechnya, the Republic of Dagestan, the Republic of Tatarstan, and so forth. But anyway, so Tuva is one of the poorest of the 84 regions, and that's in mid-Siberia, not far from the border with China, and that suffered the highest per capita death toll. And that's actually where the current defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, is from. He's half ethnically Tuvan, half ethnically Russian. So it seems that the remotest and the poorest regions have suffered most. So the government is not keen to risk people who are from well-off families, who've got connections. That would dispirit the elite, the sort of people who've got some say in this, and sort of people who actually could get their sons abroad, those who are more plugged into Western media, who know what's going on, who are not so naive, not so dependent on the state. So, not the sons of intelligence officers, or certainly, or much less their daughters, they shan't be sent into harm's way. 'Twas ever thus. So Moscow suffered the lowest per capita death toll out of 84 regions. Now, I wonder why that would be. So they're trying to induce people to sign up for these salaries, and these are up to 4 times the typical annual salary. So that's very alluring to people from the most isolated and poverty-stricken regions. And poverty in Russia really means poverty. I'm not saying anybody's starving. They might be malnourished. They might have just enough to eke out an existence. They're surviving rather than living, if you'll see what I mean. They can never spare a penny for any treats, have the clothes they need and no more. Bearing in mind in Russia, because of the extreme seasonality of the climate, you need 2 completely separate wardrobes. You need obviously Arctic clothing for winter, and you need shorts and t-shirt for summer. Buryatia, an ethnic minority region in Siberia, they've suffered an awful lot of casualties as well. But anyway, they're obviously scraping the bottom of the barrel, sending people scarcely trained with a minimal refresher course to the battlefront, people who can't operate these more sophisticated systems. And one of the advantages the Ukrainians might have is better training, sending their troops to NATO countries for a few months of training, and then coming back, and there would be more than a match for the Russians they're up against. Zaporizhia, forgive me if I mispronounced that nuclear power station in southern Ukraine, the largest power station in Europe, nuclear power station. So anyway, the Russians are there, they're firing at Ukrainian positions. The Ukrainians are not firing back for fear they hit the nuclear power station and cause a second Chernobyl. You might have heard of era, and it caused thousands of deaths, from radiation, very aggressive forms of cancer, children born very severely disabled. And the Russians seized that and dug in briefly, idiotically, digging trenches and releasing this radioactive dust, which will kill them in the long run. But in Zaporizhia, it seems that there was a method to their madness, thinking the Ukrainians wouldn't dare fight back. If they do blow up the power station, nuclear power station, all the Russian troops around there, they're toast. They'd just be atomized. But there'd be long-term environmental harm to many, many square miles around there for the Ukrainians. And the International Atomic Energy Authority has condemned Russia for doing this. Because it's more or less the middle of Ukraine, well, a bit to the south, it'll affect Ukraine and not really Russia, apart from the illegally occupied Crimean Peninsula. So Medvedev, the former president, he's been very bellicose about this. When he was president in 2008 to 2012, is when he was actually more pro-Western than Putin, and that's he gulled Obama, who wanted to press the reset button in relations with Russia. Well, how naive Obama turned out to be. But Medvedev has now been particularly aggressive. And in May this year, he said that NATO arming Ukraine might cause nuclear war. Well, the only one who might cause it is Russia. I mean, why is NATO arming Ukraine in the first place? Because of the Russian invasion. Why is there some danger around Zaporizhia in the first place? Because of the Russian invasion. And then Medvedev is trying to blame the Ukrainians for it, just like when the Russians murdered 50 Ukrainian prisoners of war. They claim that the Ukrainians killed their own men. Now, why would they do that? And how strange it is, what an extraordinary coincidence that not a single Russian soldier guarding those Ukrainian prisoners was either killed or wounded. Anyway, so Medvedev said that the Ukrainian government and their Western allies were trying to create a new Chernobyl. Now, why on earth would the Ukrainians deliberately cause such an explosion in their own country? I mean, it's utterly moronic, but it's a sort of flagrant lie, which is really par for the course from these Kremlin warmongers. And Medvedev then said there might be accidents at European Union nuclear power plants. So he's threatening us with setting off explosions there. And obviously, if such an explosion does occur, we know it won't be an accident and we know he'll be behind it. And of course, the European Union and NATO should take action, should hit a Russian nuclear power station. I mean, and you might say that, of course, Third World War. But if we don't strike back, they're not going to stop. Unless we retaliate, they're just going to do it more and more and more, thinking they can do so with impunity. I really don't want a war, but I mean, it's Putin and his merry mob have started one. Right, so please check out my website and me on Patreon. Goodbye.